Hello and welcome to the Gonzales Mitchell Show. I'm Clay Mitchell,
And I'm Patrick Gonzales.
and today we have a guest. Who are you, sir?
I'm sorry.
Who are you, sir? We have a guest on, but who are you?
My, I'm Delegate Steve Arentz, District 36 representative. Been in the House of Delegates since 2013, and I am the ranking member on the Economic Matters Committee, which is kind of an honor, and it kind of is a tout for us for my district and my district mates. And if you don't mind, I'd like to briefly describe that. Is that all right?
Sure. Yeah.
As you all know, hopefully most of you know that Senator Hershey is the minority leader in the Senate, which is a very, very important role. Most of the time, we're fighting from behind here, and we're trying to play catch up in a heavily minority position. Delegate Jacobs is the ranking member on Environment and Transportation, and Delegate Grist is the ranking member on Appropriations. And I say the ranking member. What that means is we're the top Republicans that get to go in the back room with the majority party to really get a final stab at a bill and the most input. And we do that very well. And I think it's a tribute to our district that we're all in those types of leadership positions. With 6 standing committees, we kind of had 3 of them for the Republicans.
I got to say, everyone here in District 36 is glad to have you all there in the House and in the Senate. You do awesome work, and like you said, you're in the minority party, and it's tough. And I think the frustration is that the Democratic supermajority there in the House and the Senate, they don't even have to listen to you; they can just do their own thing. But you do yeoman's work by tempering down some of these bills and getting some changes through by amendment, and without that, we really would have nothing.
And the good news on that, most of the amendments we can get through are in the committee and in the back room. That's where you really, there's no sensationalism, and there's common sense sometimes can prevail over there.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I've been around politics all my life. This was one of the worst sessions I've ever seen or read about or witnessed. This was just horrible.
Clay and Patrick, it was kind of funny because we tease now, but I sit on the I Told You So committee, which is for years we've been talking about a lot of things. And honestly, after last year with so many tax increases and fee increases, we thought the common sense was going to start to show itself. You look at the blueprint, you look at energy and what have you, and you really thought this was a year that we would all start communicating again. And I sadly, I couldn't have been more wrong. And that's disappointing because you look at a state that's in a financial turmoil. I mean, and as some of the events over the last few days just enhance that and tell you a little bit more about what a problem we have. And the budget and how the governor addressed the budget is beyond comprehension to many of us, because you don't do some of the things he's done here without planning for the future. Nothing in this budget that we put through this year, very little is good. It's shifting of funds. It's no real cuts to speak of. If things like the rainy day fund, not filling that is considered a cut to the majority party, and we see that as that's no cut because that money isn't there. We see the doubling down on certain things, which has just been energy over the winter. You've probably experienced it too, to a point where people's bills have gone through the roof. Some of that is due to usage, but the other part is our energy policies just need to be reined in. And as we get down through this conversation, there's some things that I think they did to try to make things a little bit better. But there's nothing in the bills, the primary bills, that really sit back and say, other than a $40 or $80 a year rebate, nothing in there says your rates will get better. Everything says they're just going to continue to skyrocket.
And the rebate really is your own money back through taxes.
That's kind of where we're at. I mean, if you take the budget, one of the things the governor touts, and in all honesty, it's a shell game for him, and I understand why he does it. But when he makes the statement that 96% of the people are going to feel a decrease in their taxes, on paper, part of that is true, but then you have to move to the next step. when you're looking at making, let's say $100,000, well, let's take $200,000 a year. And you look at that tax decrease that you're going to assume on income tax, that comes out to about $108. On $200,000 a year, $108 is nothing to a person. I mean, it means something, but then you go to the next step and you say, well, let's talk about what we've increased. Let's talk about your registration. Let's talk about the tax on the data. Let's talk about these things, where it's going to go. Let's talk about the tax on tires. If you drive a car, you've just with the registration, you've lost that tax benefit, if you will. And that gets culminated. It just compounds itself as we move down the line with the things we've done. And it's disingenuous and kind of like, again, a shell game to sit back and say that you're really doing something for the people, because you're not. And I reference this, and it's kind of a tough reference, but Governor Moore's a nice guy. I mean, I like him. He's very pleasant to be around, but he ran a nonprofit. And a nonprofit by its nature, and I think you've heard me say this before, they get their money two ways. They get their money from grants, from the government gives it to them, or they get it from donations, which a grant is a donation, but it's a government donation. And he's treating the taxpayers like they're donors. And that's not the way you run a business. You can't, you just can't sustain yourself that way. So he's now gotten into the point where he's trying to do that, and we're donors. And I got people saying, well, that's a great idea. I'll just donate a whole lot less than I'm going to be paying in taxes. Is that okay? And I said, that's not the idea behind the budget. The budget is out there to try to recoup and try to actually pay the bills of the state. And that takes us into the areas of where the expenses have just gone out of control.
Patrick, do you have any questions on, jacket attire or anything for the delegate?
No, I mean, from my perspective, the state government is like affairs of the two houses, kind of the parents of the household. And what I see in state government right now is a dysfunctional family, a horribly dysfunctional family, because you've got to take care of the basics. Every month, a family has to pay its bills.
Correct.
Well, if they don't, that family. And unfortunately, the Maryland state government, to me, is a horribly, at this point, dysfunctional family. And if we don't take care of the basics, and the basics in life are paying your bills, then you move on from there. If the state government doesn't address this in a serious way, not in a bullshit way that we accomplish something, then ultimately we are all going to pay the price. That's my take.
Well, I would agree with you, but the baby in this state budget is things like public transportation, where that's a laudable goal, except that the vast majority of us travel by roads. And when you're taking the money from roads and applying it to public transportation with a very absolute minimal rate of return, I think it's 7% return on the rate. Mm-hmm. That's not smart politics. That's not smart business. The dollars and cents that are being generated in the state for now are being generated by these people that actually use the roads. Pardon me?
Steve, that
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
That's what dysfunctional families do. Exactly what you are doing.
Yes, I agree with you. But I mean, if you look at the budget
I'm having huge problems with hearing anybody.
Well, I guess, Clay, if you can translate it sometimes, maybe if it blows up. But
Sure.
We try to talk about common sense legislation. And I mean, some of the things Republicans, we get criticized, but we did come out with a plan. And it isn't necessarily the plan that they wanted, but, back when I was a county commissioner, I faced a 20% deficit when I was in Queen Anne's County. And we made hard decisions. We made some very hard decisions for the public, and we actually did raise taxes, but you have to have a method, and you have to be able to balance that. And when you sit back and say, well, this is what I'm going to do here, this is what I'm going to do here, just to move into the next year where it might give you a little bit of a break, knowing full well that you got this thing out there called a blueprint that has, in my opinion, had been a major failure across the state. If you take the schools, the private schools, out of that blueprint, as far as when you look at the averages, you have a big failure. We're not up to snuff anywhere. Look at our reading scores. Look at our math scores across the board. And what has changed? I mean, we had Thornton, we had Kerwin. Now, what really has changed over the years? People are making more money, but the results are coming out a whole lot worse. And some of the ideas are to move forward with the blueprint is we're going to go out and hire teacher coaches. And you say, how do you get a teacher coach? What's a teacher going to be coached with? They're teachers. They come out. They got degreed. They've been doing this. A lot of them have been doing it for a while. But those coaches are going to cost you like $100,000 a year more for each one. And you say, how are we adding state employees and cutting anything? And that's very disingenuous. And the governor came out, I guess a month or two ago when all this, and I don't want to get into the federal government because this is one of my biggest pushes. We don't need to be talking about federal government, but we need to talk about Maryland when we do these things. But he came out complaining, saying he's been doing Doge since before people knew what it was. And I sit on a joint audit committee. And let me tell you honestly, my biggest complaint, my biggest comment on that after being on that committee since the day I got in there has been there's zero accountability across the board in the state. I called somebody just the other day about social services, and I can't get anyone in Caroline County because it's a Caroline County issue, but I get somebody in Hagerstown, Maryland, that's working out of their home. And I said, well, can you have this person call me? I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. I don't know. And you sit there and say, it's not efficient. You really have to start looking at how you're running the government and what it's doing, because we're in trouble and we're looking like a California junior. And it's not good. And when I say that, I talk from the energy policies. I talk from all these areas that we're getting ultra liberal. Deal with the problems of the state. The budget's a horrible issue. Deal with the energy, and let's deal with immigration. To continually change the narrative that the word illegal somehow doesn't mean something anymore. We decided to, again, it's passed legislation, but marijuana was illegal. Now we decided we're going to make it legal. Well, where are the boundaries? What do we do? How do we sit back and say that, we are serious about what we're doing? Look at juvenile crime in Baltimore, for God's sakes. You're watching the things. If you watch the special on TV the other day, it was sad to listen to the people talking about these. Some of these kids were out on monitors. They've been doing these things. They walk in, they do violent crime, beating a person, and they're walking out with just an ankle monitor that doesn't matter to them. They don't care. There's nothing going to happen to them. So they're moving forward.
And I think that's one of the things with Secretary Schiraldi and that whole department that needs to be torn down and rebuilt back up. That is a mess. And I think it's not that people need some government services, but like you're saying, you want it to run, and you want it to run correctly, and you don't want to hear from someone in another part of the state when you have a local problem that is working out of the house. You don't want to hear that.
But when you're tied up in bureaucracy, you're back to this one Maryland mantra that I think O'Malley wanted to put in place. They want the state to run everything. And let's touch on energy right now. There were 3 major energy bills that came out. And as I said earlier, there's some, if you think about them globally, parts of them make sense. 1035, which is the craziest bill, we saw that thing expanded from the first time we saw it from like 24 pages to 71 pages within 2 days. And you're expected to do that. And this was all done at the end of session. This is a major bill. This is a major problem for the state. And we're addressing it in the last 2 or 3 days of session. That's not right. You look at the budget. We addressed the budget. We didn't vote on the budget till the final days. And that's crazy. And when you look at what we did with the budget is made up by the governor and the majority party. And then we're handed it in a committee setting where 7 people get to look at it from the other side. 7 people get to voice some opinions, but you got to be cautious in committee, because if you bring up something in committee and it gets rejected, it's not something you can bring up for a full floor vote, meaning 141 people got to vote on it. You get 7 people to vote on it. And that gets all pushed behind the scenes. So as a minority party, you have to make decisions whether you're going to bring that amendment out on the House floor, or if you're going to do it in your committee where it will get rejected. And if it's brought up on the House floor, that was already covered by the committee. We're not going to discuss it. Those are very difficult positions to put us in, and it's a very bad position to put the voters in, because the voters need to understand what we're voting on, not just the things in the back room, the global part of the bill. You know, we fight things with the ALER, which is where we set our rates, and that gets pushed through with a minority of people that actually do that. And they say, well, no, that's all done. That's all good. We want to vote on every tax increase. We want to vote on every fee increase, because the people out there need to know what we're doing. But back to the energy bills, 1035 does a bunch of stuff for us. It actually brings natural gas back into the state. It tries to bring it in. I'm not sure it's bringing it in the way you and I would like it, because if you look at all the papers out there, I mean, natural gas is probably overall the cleanest source of energy we have next to nuclear. And nuclear, you can argue some of that, but it's probably the cleanest source of energy we have today, based on what you got to do to build solar and wind and what have you, and even nuclear. But it goes back saying that, but in the bill itself, it sits back, as soon as something like hydrogen comes available, you're going to have to immediately convert that. So a gas company says, why would I do that in Maryland? Why would I even consider that? I'm not going to bring my money back. I'm not going to make my money, but all this costs ratepayers if they're going to make money. We're doubling and tripling down on solar. And that's a tough thing. But the other thing it did, and this is kind of a I told you so, it brings nuclear back in as a clean energy source, tier 1. The only reason we did that, in my opinion, is the fact that we could not possibly meet our quote unquote energy goals, emission goals, and greenhouse gas goals without doing that. That's a major source. For over 21 years, we've been pushing solar in this state, 21 years, and we've been able to generate up to maybe 6.5%, 7% of our total energy is solar in this state. That's not a good investment. That's not telling you we did the right thing.
And in the meantime, we're taking those power generation plants, the fossil fuel quote unquote plants, offline. We have, I think, 2 more in the foreseeable future that are going to be taking offline. In the meantime, we've been relying on this, utility scale solar panel idea of wind power, while we're importing 40% of our electricity from other states, which generate their electricity primarily through fossil fuels. I think they're trying to solve a problem where there isn't a viable alternative. The push for clean energy, well, I think it's a laudable goal, but my gosh, you just can't do it in this manner without having enough capacity there to replace the fossil fuels you're taking offline. And I just think we're years and years from that happening. And Steve, what I've also got out of this session, especially with the solar panel issue here on the shore, is Eastern Shoremen and Western Shore, Western Maryland people rather, we're not treated as equals. And I think our delegates and our senators, they're just treated as just sort of decoration in the room. We have to have an opposition party. Well, there they are. They don't have a voice. But I don't like the way you all and the people of the shore have been treated. We're not brought to the table. Our local zoning control as to solar energy has been taken away, stripped away, and it's going to be run by Annapolis. And that's one of the messages I got out of this session, is they just don't care about us.
Well, if you look at that, we used to have senator per county, and I don't know how that ever went away, because that's kind of would give us some power. But Clay, they sit back and they make comments that the whole Eastern Shore, the number of students on the whole Eastern Shore, is not what Montgomery County has. So, you look at this and they make those comments, and I said, but you know what? That's not the way the world works. The world works because we're providing very valuable services over here. Our number one thing is farming, and we fail to meet that because most people in the General Assembly think a farm is Safeway. And that's a very tough, hard thing to overcome, because what am I going to do? And you sit back and say, well, I'll just go to Safeway. Well, they don't understand what goes on. And, I'll touch on a couple of things. I know we're getting close to our time, but the other thing is about how they've taken over our land and what they're trying to do with it. It doesn't make sense. It's inconceivable that we want to tie up 5% of all of our protected lands for solar, and that most of that's in the rural counties. The PSC is now looking at, PJM is looking at their sustainable energy, the baseload energy. Everything they're looking at is natural gas. When you ask them the question, and we did this because we took a trip there, what are you doing for Maryland? When we start looking at Maryland, we need to get to these numbers based on our goals for clean energy. And they say, well, you're out of luck. We can't do it. We can't provide that renewable energy. Nobody can at this point. And Maryland's going to be that little star sitting out there looking good if they ever get near something like that, while everything around us is still natural gas and another alternative energy.
I think I saw the I think it was the head of the PJM said, boy, that situation in Maryland, that's pretty dire. And he didn't get, I don't think it's his job to get into saying, hey, you got to do X, Y, and Z. All they can do is give the information. But when the head of the PJM says it's a dire situation in Maryland, I think there was a state senator up in Pennsylvania said, boy, Maryland, they're irresponsible.
Yeah,
In this, and I agree with that.
And you're hurting Pennsylvania also. That's hurting them. But keep in mind, we have been down this thing. We've looked at this so-called renewable energy. We've never looked at it globally. We've looked at it how it matches what we think we want. You don't have a viable way to get rid of these panels. You don't have a viable way to clean up battery mesh. You don't have a viable way to put out batteries. We're not ready for this thing. And it is demonstrated. Rooftop solar, and you can ask your friends, and you heard me ask the question the other night, how many people have solar? Out of maybe 60, 70 people, we have one. Well, that's because, you know what? It is a failed business model. Rooftop solar is not the way to go. And we don't want to do that. We want to double down on it and keep saying we're going to give more subsidies. And they've done this across the board. When you irresponsibly take out all your baseload energy and think that you're going to replace that with something that you look at Spain and all that just the other day, if you thought you were there, you're watching it fail. The last thing I wanted to touch on in this energy bill, and it's actually a part of it was reasonable if you think of it. The state has finally recognized that they need to do something to put an order to our energy process. And so they put up this bill 1037, which is going to put a commission together to actually address and see what are the viable solutions. Our only hope is that they get good people on that commission. It's going to be run by the PSC, which you've seen that is a political appointee. He's going to do what the governor wants and what the will of the governor is, not the will of the people and the ratepayers. But nothing in these bills, nothing is addressing the energy dollars and cents rates we pay.
And not one member of the PSC is from the Eastern Shore. And I think that gets back to the point I was making, is that they don't care. They really don't.
Yeah. It's like so many other things. They really are funneled on the major counties and are focused on that. And to continually do what we're trying to do in Baltimore the same way and coming up with the same results. Now, there is some kudos to the mayor. I think murder rates are down, but overall, we fought in the General Assembly this year. It was fought that, Baltimore City still don't have air conditioning in all their schools. How is that possible? That was such a big issue years ago. We thought we addressed it. Where did that money go?
It was 10, 12 years ago when that first came up. My gosh. Well, I want to have you back on, Patrick and I, because I think in July, electric rates go back up again. That electric auction didn't go so well. And we'll have a I Told You So part 2 episode. And there's other areas to cover that, we need to talk about.
And just last piece here, we all put out a newsletter. If your listeners want to cover, get on my web, go to my email. It's the state email, and ask you to put on that list, because believe me when I tell you, I could take 3 days to talk about the things I think I know and I want to talk about and how I want to get them out there. But I do appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you two. And despite the fact, Patrick, that is one heck of a jacket.
He's an Osmond brother, nobody knows that. And he retired from music about 10 years ago, and there he is.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, Steve, we appreciate having you on. We want to have you back on again. And It's time to say by the clock on the wall, goodbye, Patrick. And I think
Yeah.
Patrick already left us.
I think you did, but goodbye, Patrick. Goodbye, Clay.
Goodbye, Patrick. Steve, thanks so much for being on.
No, I'm
and
still here.
we'll talk.
Goodbye, Patrick.
All right.
Goodbye.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Steve. See you.